The first day that you're legal to solo is your 16th birthday. I soloed on my 16th birthday at about 9 in the morning, and then my mom took me down to the DMV to get my driver's license, and they promptly failed me on my driver's test. So, I recall telling the guy, I really don't care. I'm going back to the airport and do what I prefer anyway. Thank you very much.
And welcome to another episode of the Bandit Room. My name is Charles. I'm joined here in the studio today by Mr. Caleb.
Hello again.
Thanks for joining. Across the table from me, we have Mr. Aggie.
What's up?
How are you?
Good, man.
Good.
2 episodes in a row. I'm present.
Wow, yeah. Look at this.
I couldn't miss Ken.
Look at this. And our special guest across the table, we have Mr. Ken Nelson. Thank you for joining us, Ken.
Hey, pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Now, Ken, you are a pilot as well as a volunteer instructor at the Rock Hill Flyers Club. Why don't you talk a little bit about that? You've got a long history in the aviation industry. What sort of, let's talk a little bit about the volunteer work that you do at the Rock Hill Flyers.
Yes, 4 years ago, several of us at the Rock Hill Airport saw a need in the local aviation community. We kept having young people, particularly high school-aged kids from the area, that would come to the airport, perhaps for a meeting or a social event, and you could see the passion in their eyes when they expressed how much they'd love to become a pilot.
Yeah.
The inflation is no stranger to aviation as well, and the cost of actually getting that first license, private pilot license, can easily run $25,000 or maybe even $30,000.
Wow.
And to many a 15, 16-year-old, that sounds like $1 million to them.
Yeah.
Right.
Hard for them to put their hands on that kind of money. So we thought, what can we do to help? And we banded together, got many members of the local aviation community, came up with a plan to start a 501c3. And we named it after a local Rock Hill resident, actually the David Griffin Aviation Foundation. And just a little bit about David. He was a retired engineer, called Rock Hill home. He was actually British born, and he spent his entire retirement doing aviation STEM programs in local high schools around the area and did a lot of work with kids. So we started this foundation, named it after David. He had passed in 2019, and in honor of the work he had begun. And we got some aircraft donated to us to use.
Yeah.
And we got a corps of flight instructors that were willing to volunteer their time. And we started holding ground schools monthly to help them prepare for the written test. And we've been able to raise enough money to operate that and structure it where the kids pay for the fuel that the plane burns while they're actually flying, but that's their only real expense. Yeah. And it ends up probably between $3,000 and $4,000 for them to get their private pilot license.
Wow.
So we bring it down 90%.
Yeah.
When we go back and look at our own history, that's just about the prices in 1978.
Yeah.
It's never been cheap,
Yeah.
but we didn't want it necessarily, wasn't our intention that it be free. We just wanted to put it within the reach of young people and make it affordable.
And how, what's the sort of qualifier to get involved in the program like that for these people who are joining this?
We currently are focusing on that 15 to 19-year-old age group, and we ask before we put them in a weekly flight program, actually taking their flying lessons, that they pass the government FAA private pilot written test. And that's a pretty complicated test, very comprehensive, lots of different topics, weather, regulations, aerodynamics, the mechanics of how airplanes operate. And so we hold a monthly ground school on the third Saturday of every month at the Rock Hill Airport, and it's free for those that attend. And we find our young folks between 6 and 12 months, depending on how much time they have to devote to it, pass their written test, and then we try to put them into a weekly flight program.
Nice.
Yeah, passing the written test is not easy.
Yeah,
Especially
I
when
was
you
gonna
take
say-
it at the age of 50.
I was going to say, I can attest to how difficult it
Well,
is.
and it's a government format, multiple choice test,
Right.
and if you have no experience with that, they're I won't say tricky, but they
Yeah.
can be challenging.
Now, you've been a pilot all your life. You might say it's in your blood. Your father was a pilot
My
as well?
father was a pilot in World War II,
Wow.
and when he got out of the service, he went to work for the government, not flying. And when I was 12 or 13, I expressed an interest, found a coupon for a $25 introductory flight back in the 1970s, early. Actually, I think the first one was 1968. I was in fourth grade, come to think of it. And so he took me to the airport. I flew my flight, loved it, and 30 minutes with an instructor in a little two-place airplane. They let me fly it the whole time. It was great. And he got to talking to the instructor and found out what it would take for him to get back into flying. So it was something that he and I kind of did together as I was growing up.
That's really fantastic. Was he into flying or aviation before the war, or was that something he enrolled in the...
A good question. He was unique, I think. He grew up in the south side of Chicago, and he was a teenager in the late 30s as the war broke out, and he actually delivered prescriptions when he was 16 years old for Walgreens in Chicago, and he took his money and took flying lessons in a Piper Cub in one of the smaller airports in the Chicago area.
Wow.
And so he had an early interest in aviation and pursued it, and so it was. I don't know anyone that was more passionate, particularly about the general aviation side, which is what we do with smaller airplanes, predominantly just fly for fun.
Yeah. Do you know much about his service career, where he was stationed or where he flew?
Army Air Corps, and he did his early training in Columbus, Mississippi, and my mom was a volunteer at the USO, and that's how they met. And
Oh, wow.
So I wouldn't be here, I guess, if he hadn't have gone in the Army Air Corps and been stationed there for training.
Wow. That's wild. Do you know where he was deployed in the...
He actually was stateside during his career. By the time he had an older brother who enlisted as a medic and served in Europe. But at his age, by the time he got in, Europe had signed the armistice, and only the Pacific theater was still active, and they had enough pilots from the Europe side that, and I know he was disappointed that he never got deployed, but he flew for the military stateside, and then at the end of the war, they offered the chance: you can stay in for a career or you can exit, and he chose to go civilian and start a family.
Interesting. Do you know what kind of planes he would have been in at that time?
He flew, started their basic training back then was also Piper Cubs, and then I think he was in the T6 Texan, North American T6, and probably Stearman as well, built by Boeing, those aircraft.
Interesting. So do you have an independent interest in flying, or did your father sort of advocate for the
I liked it,
concept?
but I always got the sense of it, because he was very supportive of me and growing up, and tried to give me the opportunity if I chose to pursue it. I started to work at the airport there where I was living when I was 15, and fueling the planes, washing the planes, helping the mechanics. It was a great job to have in high school. I did it sophomore, junior, and senior year, and learned a lot. But just being at the airport, 5, 6, 7 days a week, it was heaven for me.
Yeah.
And interesting side story, his mother had passed, and his father had preceded her. And I remember we were driving home from the funeral, and there was a small settlement that he was going to inherit. It was quite modest. But my mother said, gee, I'm looking forward to us getting the new living room suite that I've always wanted with that settlement. And my dad turned to her and said, no, we're going to let Ken use that money to get his instrument rating. And I remember sitting in the back seat like it was yesterday. My mom was pretty disgusted. But that's what we did. And I don't think she ever did get her new living room.
That was going to be another question. Oh, man. So let's talk a little bit about your career, because you've flown a little bit of everything from the time that you got that license. You've been in corporate jets, commercial airliners. Let's talk about the kind of different roles that you've had.
Yeah, I was airline focused from an early age, and there's two basic paths to that: military, to which you come out with enough experience to qualify, in many cases, to go directly to work for one of the major airlines, or the civilian path. And the civilian path, particularly back, we're talking, I started in 1978 working as a commercial pilot. It was a stair-step process. So I started as a flight instructor and started to fly charter trips in single and small 6-passenger twin-engine airplanes for that company. And then was hired as a corporate pilot. I flew for a number of large insurance companies and moved around the country in working for that industry, turboprops and Learjets mostly, and very much enjoyed Learjet's a robust aircraft and a pleasure to fly.
Yeah.
Then I happened to be working in Louisville, Kentucky, and UPS developed their air freight division right there across the airport, and I had several pilot friends that went to work there, and I decided to join them. So I worked flying 727s for a contractor for UPS for about 3 years, and that gave me enough jet experience and medium-sized jet experience to then qualify and go to work for a major airline. In 1986, I made that move over.
Okay.
I retired just about 21 months ago when I turned 65, which is a federal requirement for airline pilots that you can't work after your 65th birthday.
And what are you doing now?
Well, I work for a small regional airline, and I work in their training department and teach their new hire pilots in the simulators that they operate in their training department. So I enjoy it very much. I get to give back to an industry that gave a lot to me, and I get surrounded by the enthusiasm of young people just starting their careers that are excited about that.
With your years of experience as a flight instructor, what are some of the big changes that you've seen in the industry over that time, particularly in the training side?
Yeah, it has become much more difficult. What the FAA requires in terms of knowledge and experience. Plus, there's been a technology shift as well. But the airlines have achieved, in this country anyway, a phenomenal safety record over the last 20, 25 years. We've been decades since we've had or well over a decade since we've had a fatal accident in the United States in the air carrier side. Unfortunately, the general aviation side still has a higher rate of accidents, and the FAA is working as hard as they can to bring that down and follow the model that the airline example has set. And a lot of that involves the human factors, decision-making skills, and resource management. And they're trying to bring that level of training into the very beginning of pilot training, private pilot training as well.
Gotcha.
And then technology-wise, just about every airplane flown today has a tablet computer in it at a minimum.
Yeah.
And GPS is the primary navigation means. And of course, when I started, none of that existed. So,
Right.
much more challenging for our 15, 16, 17-year-old kids, the amount that they have to learn
Yeah.
and demonstrate, as opposed to what I went through, 40, 50 years ago when I was doing this.
Right. So you kind of started your career in instruction, and you're moving back to it now.
Right, and during my air carrier career, I spent 15 years working in the training department for the airline and instructing, and that was a great experience.
Gotcha.
So I enjoy that side of the industry.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like it. I mean, especially the work you're doing with the Rock Hill Flyers. It's almost entirely training oriented. When you were a flight instructor, you're up in the planes with them. It's a combination of that, right? Is it a combination of being in the planes and then you're also just like actually teaching things in normal classroom environments at the same time?
Exactly. We focus just on that first rating, the private pilot license. It's their first rung in the ladder. If we don't require our young people to be career-oriented, but we find the ones that with enough passion and willing to put in the hours and study and work, most of them are career-focused in aviation. But yeah, it averages for private pilot training about 75% of the time they're with the instructor, and then about 25% or the last half of their training, they fly solo by themselves under the supervision of their instructor.
So with that said, is the pilot shortage over now, or is it still there's an ongoing issue?
Interestingly, we were talking about that when I was at work last night. We've hit an interesting time in the last 90 days or so where several major airlines have announced that they've suspended hiring for the rest of this year. And they have different reasons for that. One of them is they aren't able to take delivery of new Boeing aircraft as quickly as what they had anticipated. But there is a pilot shortage that exists. There's no denying it. And hiring in the airline industry has come in waves. And you had that World War II wave where a lot of people were hired in the early 1950s up through about 1960. And when you project their 30-year career, or 35 average, then that put them out in the early 1980s when I got in. And my generation was kind of the replacement for that early and first major hiring push as airlines expanded. And, of course, airlines have gone from travel for the elite in the 50s and 60s into the normal mode of transportation for all of us today.
Right.
And so they're much bigger. There's much more growth and many more flights than there used to be. And now my generation of pilots that came in the 1980s has put our 30, 35, in some cases, if you're hired early enough, maybe 40 years in, and we are retiring out. And that started maybe 5 years ago where it was quite noticeable. Hundreds of pilots retiring every year from just about all the major airlines. So that will have to be replaced.
Right.
Yeah.
So the long term is that airlines will add pilots year in, year out for the next several years.
So during your commercial airlines career, what was your favorite aircraft to fly?
Good question. The Boeing 757 was a 70s generation airliner. very powerful Rolls-Royce engines, and a true joy to fly. Unfortunately, even when I was flying it 15 years later, the fuel issue became critical for that airplane. The only way you could operate it profitably was to fly it what we call exactly on profile. You had to make sure you descended economically, climbed economically, chose the most economical cruise altitudes, because even then, at fuel prices, the airplane was difficult to make a profit with. Today, they're just about all out of major airline service and have given way to more efficient aircraft types. It's a little bit like selling your V8 hot rod and flying around in a turbocharged four-cylinder car instead. Most of the airlines today, they have plenty of performance to do the job, but they don't have that excess thrust that those early generation jets had.
Interesting.
Did you get a chance to fly the 747?
I never did. The only heavy aircraft, and aircraft are considered heavy if they're over 300,000 pounds gross takeoff weight, was a 767, also a fine flying airplane. And my first big jet was the Boeing 727, and I found for an airplane that was designed in the early 50s with slide rules and drafting tables, it was a phenomenally good airplane, very safe, very stout, and did a great job. So I probably favored that aircraft from that more powerful era. It's more exhilarating for a pilot. However, I spent over a decade flying Airbus aircraft, and technology-wise, they're pretty unparalleled. European-built aircraft and very efficient, and the technology of the flight deck was phenomenal.
That's interesting.
I've had a chance to fly the 747 as a passenger and also the A380, but 747 is always going to be my favorite aircraft to fly in. That was a unbelievable experience every time I flew in that.
Yeah, I mean, there are aircraft in the history of commercial aviation that were pivotal.
Right.
The DC-3 was the first aircraft built that an airline could actually make a profit with the number of passengers and wasn't relying on government subsidies to fly mail to make a profit. But the 747, the chairman of the board of Pan American Airlines, which back in the 60s was the most prestigious airline in the world, and his name was Juan Trippe, and he was known as a very colorful individual. And he encouraged Boeing to build a 747 type aircraft, something that would hold that many people and have that extreme range. And Boeing wasn't sure if they wanted to build it, and they negotiated and okay, we'll go for it. But it was considered at the time that both the chairman of Boeing and Juan Trippe, the chairman of Pan Am, basically put all their chips in and risked the future of both companies. Had the airplane not been a success, chances are there wouldn't be a Boeing today, or and certainly there is no more Pan Am, but it would have been out of business shortly thereafter because they made a huge financial commitment to buy the airplanes to encourage Boeing to build it.
So what's your thought on what's happening with Boeing right now?
I don't know. I'm not currently flying Boeing aircraft. I probably don't watch it as close as some. However, throughout my career, Boeing has always been respected as a first-class company, an American company. It was a shipbuilding company back, centuries ago. In fact, terminology that we take for granted, like flight deck in an aircraft, that's a Boeing term, and it comes from their shipbuilding history. And I know when I first started flying Boeings, the 727, Boeing was the largest cash-generating company in America. And I was flying freight for UPS under contract, and they were the second largest cash-generating company in America. So, I mean, I think in our country, Boeing has its place as a major company and a major manufacturer, obviously things have not gone 100% well, and I believe they'll have the wherewithal and the resources to correct that and get themselves back on the path to
Right.
and restore their reputation that they've spent 100 years developing.
Right.
Without, I guess, getting into too much detail, can you share some memorable experiences that you've had from your time as a flight instructor or your time as a pilot?
Why not more details, Charles?
Well,
Why
okay,
do you
all
have to
right.
not have details?
Okay. I'm sure these are not issues involved with you. Perhaps they're your students got themselves into some trouble or something like that.
Not really. On that,
Or
I
difficult situations you've had to fly through.
I raised 2 kids myself.
Oh, wow.
And I understand what's involved in taking your high school age children to the airport and turning them over to someone else and saying, yeah, teach them to fly. It's a tremendous responsibility that we take extremely seriously. So we have a reputation, I believe, of overtraining. We've never had a student have a less than satisfactory outcome on their check rides or any of that, even though in the industry it's about 50-50 passing on the first attempt. We make sure all of our students are more than prepared and all have passed. So we really haven't had any harrowing experiences at all. I can tell you as an instructor, it always feels good. I have a young man I've been working with for over a year and a half, and he's taking his check ride at the end of May, and we're all looking forward to that. It's a very exciting day for him and for me. But watching him solo the airplane for the first time, that's a touching moment and a big step in their becoming a pilot. And I've been able, in the 4 years I've been here, I've been able to solo 4 of the young people myself, and it's always great. It'll choke you up to watch them go out. And traditionally we do 3 takeoffs and landings. We'll start off flying with them. We call that dual instruction when the instructor's in the flight deck with them. But then we get out and they go and do 3 takeoffs and landings by themselves, and usually their family is there to watch the event.
Nice.
It's a big moment.
Yeah.
That's my favorite part of it is the first solo.
The only thing I remember from my first solo is like the instructor got out and he goes, go ahead, make sure you bring my headset back. It's an expensive headset.
Well, the first day that you're legal to solo is your 16th birthday. And if we get them young enough, we aim for that goal. We have had that occur. I soloed on my 16th birthday at about 9 in the morning. And then my mom took me down to the DMV to get my driver's license, and they promptly failed me on my driver's test. So, I recall telling the guy, I really don't care. I'm going back to the airport and do what I prefer anyway. Thank you very much.
So of all during when your commercial flying time, what was the favorite places that you got a chance to visit?
Commercial pilots, there's different things, and if you work for a large enough company, and I was fortunate to, there's a lot of options in the type of routes that you fly. I tried them all. My favorite type of flying was the transcontinental flight missions where you would basically leave the East Coast and go somewhere in the western U.S. Across the whole country. It's about a 5-hour flight on average, sometimes a little more. And then come back. I like that mission. It suited me. A lot of the pilots will gravitate towards the long-haul international or transoceanic, particularly Europe flying. But you depart late in the evening after the dinner hour, and then you arrive with the time change in Europe at sunrise, and then 30 hours later you're coming back 6 hours or more off your time schedule. And I did that for a couple of years. It was a ton of fun. I mean, flying into Paris on a beautiful morning at sunrise, and you can't help but thinking about Lindbergh doing it in the spirit of St. Louis and what that must have been like. But I found that it was kind of exhausting, that mission. And,
Right.
And so I tended to be continental based on the trips, and also you can. It's a seniority-based industry. So some people, most pilots, as they become more senior, will fly larger equipment and fly longer trips and get into the more of the international. Myself, I tended to enjoy better seniority by staying on medium-sized equipment and flying just within the United States. A lot of up and down the East Coast.
Right.
Miami to New York many times.
Yeah. What qualities would you say make an excellent pilot?
That's a good question.
Got to stay away from alcohol for 24 hours.
Yeah, well, that kind of
Sort of bare minimum there, I think.
yeah, they pretty much demand that. It's a career-ending mistake. I would have to say, you just have to love flying.
Right.
And there are those, a minority, but there are people that get into it for other reasons. Maybe it's the schedule, the potential towards the end of your career to be paid relatively well for the number of days that you're away from home. But detail oriented because it's a unique. People say, "Well, what do you do?" I'd say, "Well, I'm a heavy equipment operator. 182,000 pounds of aluminum, and kind of like the people that operate our nuclear power systems. It's very precise. You have to follow a very strict set of procedures and rules, and operate it that way, and be prepared. Also, if things don't go perfectly, to go into what we call non-normal procedures to address that. And I suppose. But I've found in flying with people that those that really love flying often are the best natural pilots, make the best landings, fly the smoothest. And I'm biased because I've always been involved on the little airplane side of aviation. But I think if you fly for the airline all week and then you run out Saturday and Sunday and hang out at the airport and fly a little two-passenger airplane, how could anybody surmise that either you're crazy or you just love this so much you want to do it every day?
Right. Sounds right.
Well, I mean, it's probably a difficult question. Were you flying on September 11th?
I was. I was right in the middle of it, in a extremely memorable day. I had originated that morning out of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and went to Detroit. And I was scheduled to fly Detroit to Charlotte mid-morning and then on to Roanoke for an overnight. And I enjoyed the smaller town layovers, and we already had a favorite restaurant we had been talking about where we were going to go to dinner once we got to Roanoke about 4 in the afternoon. And beautiful day, not a cloud in the sky, air was clear. We left Detroit, climbed up to altitude, and we were just approaching the eastern edge of Tennessee when the air traffic controller came on and told, now we were southbound from Detroit to Charlotte, but they told a couple of jets that were northbound heading towards New York that they couldn't land there. And because the weather was so perfect, and no one understood why, and so they asked the air traffic center controller, well, could you tell us why? And there was a very long pause, and in retrospect, we know he was getting permission to what to say. And he came back and announced that terrorists had flown an airplane into the World Trade Center. And that was something none of us were obviously prepared for. And the scope of it was pretty obvious at the very second that he said that.
Mm-hmm.
And shortly thereafter, only a few minutes, they did something that has never happened in the history of aviation, and they closed the national airspace system.
Yeah.
And they had all airplanes in the air, which is thousands, immediately turn to the closest airport and land. I quickly started negotiating because I had an airport right underneath me in eastern Tennessee, but I figured when we got on the ground we were going to be there a while. It turned out to be 3 days.
Yeah.
And I asked if I could please continue to Charlotte, and he said, go as fast as you can, go straight to Charlotte. And that's what we did. And
Wow.
I actually landed in Charlotte, and my crew and I spent 3 days. And shortly after we got to the terminal, they evacuated the terminal because there were still aircraft in the air, and of course the Shanksville aircraft that they were tracking and couldn't determine exactly where it was heading. So it was a very surreal time and very serious. And then just by coincidence, 3 days later, we were scheduled to fly in the back of the airplane, what we call deadheading, to reposition. And they didn't have all the crew members that they needed to operate the flight. So they asked me and my other pilot and flight attendants if we would operate the flight. We said, certainly. And we ended up being the first flight to depart Charlotte after they reopened the National Airspace System 3 days later. So,
Wow. I still remember that day where I was, what I was doing, everything.
Yeah, we all used to keep a Leatherman in our flight bag in case we needed a screwdriver or a pair of pliers.
All right.
And we all had to go and UPS those or mail those home because when we came back to work 3 days later, you could not.
Right.
That was as quick as those rules went into place.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's nothing with a blade on it
Right.
was going to get on the airplane.
Yeah.
So.
Did you know that over 13 million 941 forms are e-filed annually? Don't keep filing on paper. Join the millions and switch to e-filing this tax season. TaxBandits.com makes e-filing easy with quick and secure filing and an audit check to help you avoid common errors. E-file now at TaxBandits.com.
So let's talk about some of other Ken's passion about.
Yeah.
He's a big passionate camper. Would that be the right word?
Yeah.
Camping enthusiast.
It's something, again, I grew up with my parents doing that, and I married my wife 43 years ago, and our first purchase was a pop-up camper 2 weeks after we got married, and we've had some type of camper ever since, and raised our kids camping, and our kids, my oldest daughter in particular, she enjoys camping, has her own RV, and so it's something we do as a family. I just got back from a 10-day trip to Florida for a huge air show convention in Lakeland, Florida, and used my camper while I'm there. I like to tell people that it's fun during the day, but it's just as much fun at night sitting around the camper with all your pilot buddies at those kind of events.
Yeah.
Right.
Nice. You have some favorite destinations as of recently?
You know, I feel we're blessed in the Charlotte area. There's excellent places to camp less than 45 minutes away. We go to Lake Wateree frequently.
Okay.
And even there's a park at Chester, South Carolina that's nice. Kings Mountain Park. I've hit all of those. And but up in the mountains around the Blue Ridge and stuff like that, just beautiful, delightful to go in the summer because it's just 10 degrees cooler than down here.
Right.
And the vistas and views are just awesome. So, and not very far away, you know, a couple hours from Charlotte, and you can be pretty deep into the mountains and feel like you're in a total other place. So.
That's true.
Nice. Ken is my, full disclosure, he's my hangar neighbor. We share a wall for our hangars. Ken got a new passion airplane. That'd be the right word. hobby airplane?
I did. This spring, I purchased a two-place airplane just to fly for fun. It only goes a little more than 100 mile an hour, so it's not really an efficient traveling airplane, but it's a ton of fun.
Right.
Yeah.
It's rather rare. They only built 188 of them, and mine happened to be the last one that company built, and just a ton of fun. It's easy to fly, and I have a granddaughter who enjoys flying with me, and so that was probably my biggest motivation to get that plane, because it's perfect for the two of us to just go out and putt around on Saturday morning in.
Well, what's a brand of that?
It's actually the brand is a Varga, named after a gentleman, Bob Varga. He was a South Bend, Indiana resident, but he took the company to Glendale, Arizona to build the airplane. And it's a Kachina, named after the Navajo Indian doll, is the model name. And so a Varga Kachina there. Normally tricycle gear, which means got the nose gear in the front for steering and landing. Mine happened to be a slight variation of that and has a little tail wheel in the back, more like a traditional Piper Cub setup. Gotcha. And more fun to fly, I think, and works rougher, feels perhaps a little better if you want to land at a grass runway somewhere. But there's a unique organization to South Carolina. Actually, we're all pretty proud of it. It's called the Breakfast Club. It started in the late 1930s. It's the oldest continually running aviation club in America, except when fuel was rationed during World War II. Every other Sunday since the late 1930s, coming up, almost 100 years, they've met at an airport in South Carolina for breakfast. And we fly in, and different airports host the event. And then, by 10:30, 11 o'clock, we generally fly back home or go fly wherever we're going on that Sunday. And again, every other Sunday, twice a month.
Wow.
And Rock Hill is hosting on May 19th. And we'll probably have, depending on weather, between 30 and 50 aircraft fly in from around the Carolinas. Some as far, even further away, Georgia, Alabama, Tennessee. It's a fairly well-known organization amongst little airplane pilots.
If they're coming from a different state, do we make them pay or card them?
No, but everybody gets breakfast. I think it's $7, and you'll see the same planes that are always there. People that never miss one, and then occasionally you'll get someone that traveled a long way away, just heard about it, and we do our very best at Rock Hill to put on a delicious breakfast and keep a reputation for being worthwhile, getting up at the crack of dawn and getting your airplane out and flying.
I've had the chance to volunteer one time. I need to put that ahead on my calendar for next year, so I make sure I'm here. Now, some of these guys were asking, what's a typical, if for a major airline, if a pilot, what's the typical work days, and how many days do they work, how many days they are off, and how does that work?
Yeah, if you, it kind of depends on how you look at it. If you look at the total hours away from home, it might not be such a great deal, because when you leave home, you're not coming back. The typical schedule would be about 4 days a week, or somewhere between 16 and 18 days a month often. And sometimes those departures can be pretty early. We'll start pushing airplanes back at 5 a.m. here, and so that means you have to be at the airport by 4 a.m. And you might not land till 11:30 at night on that last day to come home. So, but when you're off as a line-flying airline pilot, then you're done once you get the airplane back to the base, and you go home and have your 3 or 4 days off and unencumbered. It's not generally like you have to take work home with you or even much answer the phone. Just, you'll know when your next trip is next week. Another side probably people don't consider is there's 365 Mondays in an airline year. We fly Christmas, 4th of July, your birthday, and particularly when you first start out and are building up your seniority, you pretty much go to work on Friday and get off on Monday night, and that can go on for years. And if it's a holiday, you can bet you're the one that's going to be flying.
Right.
So my kids said they enjoyed having a dad that was a pilot because when I was off, and could devote time to my family and had more weekdays off probably than most people that work a traditional 8 to 5.
Right. Cool. Now, when you're flying, obviously you're on the radio the whole time you're flying. What are some annoying stuff that you've heard other pilots use, or did you have any bad habit?
No, it's pretty structured and mostly professional.
Right.
And actually, I was always impressed by that. You mentioned, we were talking earlier about 9/11. Probably the only deviation to that was when that controller told probably 20 of us, different airlines that were on his frequency, of what had just happened. There were several people that keyed the mic and said one or two off-color words that you'd never hear on the radio.
Right.
And that day, nobody cared. But other than that, it's generally very professional. And there's a number of websites where you can Google and listen to Chicago O'Hare Tower or L.A. Tower or Atlanta. And it's amazing, how busy they get.
Right.
And the level of professionalism in our air traffic control system is phenomenal. They do a great job.
Yep.
And part of the reason that the United States enjoys such a safe record of air travel is because of the professionalism of the air traffic controllers and how they manage the system.
I've had great experience with them, even as a very young pilot, not as a young in age, but newer pilot. A great experience. Only twice I've had to ask for extra help because of weather, and they were fantastic, even for a small airplane.
Yeah, and we're lucky in Charlotte. We have a large airport and a large airline that has a second largest hub in their system here in Charlotte. You can pretty much go and fly just about anywhere in the United States from Charlotte, North Carolina.
Yep.
And that is convenient for those of us who live in the area, and it also is a draw to businesses and industry to locate here since they have that ability to travel out of here.
Ken is also a big connoisseur of a good bourbon and a good cigar.
Yes.
So
when he's not flying.
when he's not flying or teaching.
That's what I do on those days off. Now that I'm 65, I don't have to worry about my next airline trip because I don't have any. But anytime you go and fly even the smallest airplane, again, the government requires 8 hours and a level of sobriety that's about double or more what the driving laws require. Generally, 24 hours is the accepted space between alcohol and then going to operate an airplane.
So most pilots, as they teach you, should have, there's this FAA minimum and then it's like a pilot's personal minimum. Have you, when you start flying, have you set up personal minimums for everything, and have you stuck to it, or have you ever pushed the limits?
Yeah, they only work if you stick to them, and that takes a level of self-control. And that's one of the first things that we do before we solo our student pilots is has them establish their own personal minimums. And then as they become more experienced, like how much wind directly across the runway, which is an even bigger factor, how much ceiling, and that's the distance between the ground and the base of the clouds, and how much visibility. And then how would that change if you were to fly at night, for example? And then as they gain experience and get better and better, then we revise those minimums to allow them more latitude. But, if you're flying somewhere and you get there and the winds are beyond your personal minimums, then you have to have the self-control to say, as much as I wanted to land there, I'm going to turn around and go back to an airport with winds that are within my personal minimums.
Yeah.
Yep, for sure.
Do you have any kind of music that you prefer to listen to at the moment?
I'm an extreme Tidal fan. I have been a customer of them now for a little over a year, and I find it phenomenal. I know everybody has their favorite venue, perhaps, but and growing up in the 60s and 70s, you know, I've just been a rock and roller my whole life. I can't help it, but you know, if it's Pink Floyd, I always turn it up. I guess that'll never go away. So I suppose at my funeral I'll have to make a list.
That's cool. Do you have anything you're reading right now?
Currently, I'm reading manuals from my work as an instructor more than I choose. Although I am finishing a book called In Case of War, Break Glass. It's written by a British author about a young Spitfire squadron in England at the very outbreak of the war before the United States was involved. And pretty amazing the level of courage that was required to go up and get shot at, basically. And the loss rate of their comrades was startling.
Yeah.
And wow. And, you know, that generation that came out of World War II and came back, my parents were in that, often known as the greatest generation.
Right.
And when you look at what they went through at very young ages, I almost have to, I would agree with that.
Yeah. Have you seen the new Masters of the Air series?
I have not.
Oh, it's so good. They depict it very well.
Yeah.
Yeah. Talking about the loss ratio, you get like, it's just like, it's amazing that people kept going into that because, I mean, like they would send out, you know, just crazy small percentages that would make
Every
it back
time
after.
the siren went out, they ran to the airplane and jumped in as quickly as they could, and with little knowledge of what they were about to climb into.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. That first time really woke them up, though, I'm sure. Anything you're watching right now?
Nothing specific. I spend way too much time in the evenings on the, much to the dismay of the rest of my family, I'm sure, the automobile channel, everything from a Mecum auction to restore a 53 pickup.
Okay.
Have you been to one of those auctions? One of those Mecum auctions?
I have not.
I want to
I'm
go to one of
always
them.
afraid I'll sneeze and buy $100,000 Mustang.
Sold!
Yeah, exactly. But
But you're getting a new car.
I have, you know,
So you care about cars now as opposed to when you were 16?
well, the last muscle car V8 that I owned, I sold while I was still 17. And I've spent the rest of my life driving fuel-efficient cars. I've had some pickup trucks that had big engines, mostly to pull my campers, but nothing exhilarating to drive for 50 years. And I finally decided that you know, one more round. So I ordered a car that should have decent performance and give me that feel back that I have been gone from for so long. Hopefully the Rock Hill Police won't find me for that purpose.
Gotcha.
Well, we should race. You and me should race right on the taxiway.
Yeah. Well, I'll take on any comers. I think it's 495 horsepower. I'm kind of interested to see what that'll do.
All right. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
What is it? What is the?
Can you say what it is?
It's a Corvette.
Nice,
Okay.
nice.
Fantastic.
Say it loudly, Ken. We might get a sponsor for that.
Hey, yeah. Well, we'll organize the race and we'll let you know how it goes.
Oh.
Tune into the Bandit Room.
We'll find out
special
if it'll
take-
outrun a Maserati.
We'll do a special radio broadcast.
I don't know about Maserati. I don't know if you can outrun a Aston here.
It's going to be like Ford versus Ferrari. All right. Fantastic. Any final thoughts or any advice you'd like to share to aspiring pilots?
Well, don't give up your dream. And you know, we're just one venue of a way to find how to make it happen, short of just throwing money at it. I worked at the airport when I was 15, made a lot of network connections, and that opened a lot of doors for me. I don't charge, obviously, we're a volunteer organization, the young people that I fly with, but most of the instructors that I grew up with knew me well enough they didn't charge me either. So if they were around, I'd give them a big hug and thank them for all they did for me. They're not. Most of them have passed by now. So part of our motivation in doing what we do with the volunteer organization is to pay it back to the generation behind us, since we can't always thank those that helped us.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. This has been a fascinating conversation.
Thank you for having me, and I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you. I certainly did.
Thanks, Ken.
Thank you. That concludes this episode of The Bandit Room. Stick around next week and see what we talk about.
The Bandit Room is a production of Span Enterprises, located in sunny Rock Hill, South Carolina. We've been developing, supporting, and growing successful IRS e-filing and business management solutions since 2010. Go to spanenterprises.com now to learn more. The views and opinions expressed in the Bandit Room are those of the guests and do not necessarily reflect or state the opinions of Span Enterprises. No information should be considered as tax, legal, or other professional advice.
The first day that you're legal to solo is your 16th birthday. I soloed on my 16th birthday at about 9 in the morning, and then my mom took me down to the DMV to get my driver's license, and they promptly failed me on my driver's test. So, I recall telling the guy, I really don't care. I'm going back to the airport and do what I prefer anyway. Thank you very much.